Hello and welcome to an episode of Historically Marked. I am at Stuart Nelson Dog Park in Paducah, Kentucky. So you're probably wondering, well, what am I doing at a dog park? Well, this park actually has some great historical significance, especially after the guy who is named after. It is named after a guy who once marched alongside Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. And there's a historical marker that tells all about it. So here we go. And this is not just a dog park. There is some walking trails. There are at least 2 baseball diamonds. And there are also shelters where groups can have picnics and whatnot. This is a 2-sided historical marker put up by the Kentucky Historical Society. And this is marker number 2495. I find it very amazing that there are over 3,000 of these markers all over the Bluegrass State. And there's like, I want to say close to 50 here in Paducah, and that's not an exaggeration either. This is one of the newer ones put up in 2016, but this is the front side of it. Dr. William Stuart Nelson lived from 1895 to 1977. Lincoln grad had global footprints. Dr. Nelson was born in Paris, Kentucky, and graduated from Lincoln High School, which was African Americans only, in Paducah. During World War I, he served in combat as a first lieutenant. Returning to his studies, he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Howard University in 1920 and a divinity degree from Yale in 1924. And Howard University is also a historically black college and university in Washington, D.C. Just a little note on that one. And then all these say over, Captain Over. A professor of religion at Howard, Nelson studied at the Sorbonne in France in 1925 and was the first black president of Dillard and Shaw universities. Returning to Howard, he served as dean and vice president. He marched with Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and wrote several books and papers on nonviolent resistance. This park was named for him in the 1940s. So I'm not so sure about the last part. I was doing research, before I came here, as I always do. So this park was built or put together in 1936 because, the growing population of African Americans here in Paducah was growing. It was around 20,000, I believe, and they were not allowed to be, they were banned, or it was like limited access to Bob Noble Park, which is down that way on Highway 60. So the African Americans, they wanted a little park of their own where they can congregate and socialize and have a little park of their own. So this opened in 1936 with funds from the government, the National Works Progress Association, or I'm sorry, administration, my bad. But they didn't have a name for it, so they asked school children and of all ages, even high schoolers, who they should name it after. There were a lot of different names, but the one I believe was the most prominent was, of course, Dr. William Stuart Nelson, because he was known to be very brilliant, and of course he was one of Paducah's own, so it made perfect sense to name it this. So in 1938, May of that year that is, this was dedicated as Dr. William Stuart Nelson Park. About a month or 2 later, Nelson himself came and spoke here, so it's very fitting, especially for somebody who lived to see a park named after him. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering, well, how in the world did he know Mahatmas Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr.? Well, as we all know, Gandhi was a very prominent figure in India the first half of the 20th century. And by that time, in the 1940s, Nelson made several trips to India. In 1946, Nelson was visiting as a representative of the American Friends Service Committee. He marched with Gandhi through Bengal, B-E-N-G-A-L, that is, in an effort to help reconcile with the Hindu and Muslim communities. He returned to India in 1958 as a Fulbright scholar, but could not stay long enough to accompany King on his trip there in 1959. But Nelson was also active throughout the American Civil Rights Movement, speaking at the 1959 Institute on Nonviolence and Social Change and the 1962 convention of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. He was also a participant in the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965. He remained a member of various peace, religious, and educational groups until his death in 1977. At the time of his death, he was living in Washington, D.C. I do not know how many trips he made back to Paducah here, but I thought for Black History Month, it was definitely worth doing an episode on Dr. William Stuart Nelson, especially someone, I don't want to say forgotten, but somebody who hasn't really been widely known or studied about, maybe here at the local level, but not all over the United States. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Historically Marked. I am Jason at the Stuart Nelson Dog Park in Paducah, Kentucky, signing off.